Please join me in giving a warm welcome to our first speaker, Howson Lay, SDR's Strategic Foresight Manager, as he speaks on the future of the workforce.
Oh man, this is risque. Man, I love what Ron shared about the mundane. This isn't about the workforce, but in my classes at the University of Houston's Foresight program, one of my classmates did a presentation on systems thinking, and he said there's two fundamental laws to systems thinking. One is no matter how big the change, if it doesn't change the dynamics of the system, it will always revert back to the status quo. And the second law is no matter how small the change, if it changes the dynamics of the system, it will transform the system. So, love Ron speaking. It's awesome. So welcome to the future of the workforce. Thank you for being here. I'm a big fan of servant leadership. What you're going to see today is created by the Alliance for Innovation. We're a nationwide nonprofit association dedicated to foresight and innovation for local governments. So if you're committed to shaping the future, highly recommend joining, meeting folks within this community. Here's some stuff about me. I think what matters most for me is that you know that I'm committed to expanding agency for each and every one of you, right? Serving the community in the ways that you do. I just want you to have more options than you realize you had. And I believe foresight is the way to do that. And this presentation is an application of our research around the future of the workforce. So, show you what it looks like. But first, some context, right? The last few years have been chaotic and uncertain, right? First, the pandemic, right? But it's only increased. So one of the key terms to come out of the World Economic Forum last year was the polycrisis. And the polycrisis, for those who aren't familiar, is essentially all these wicked problems like the development of AI, climate change, polarization, all these big issues have become entangled within each other in such a way that we cannot just tackle one issue at a time and expect to have that problem solved or managed, right? We need to think and act in a new way that actually addresses the situation in multiple ways. On top of that, we also have technological and social change that is adding to the complexity, right? So how do we make sense of this new world, this transition period, right? To Ron's point, the city manager, when it first started, was a revolutionary idea, right? And I'd like to suggest that that phase is repeating again. We need to, once again, repurpose what it means to be in local government and city management, to think differently and to create new futures when we really have no reason to because of the lack of hope. So the education system is great. It's excellent at incorporating the past into the way we make decisions today, right? Think about case studies, books, even data, right? Forecasting, that's awesome, right? And that's important for navigating situations where there's a high degree of certainty. But what do you do when there's no precedent to what's happened, right? Like AI, polarization, climate change. What do you do? That is where foresight comes in, to incorporate the future, the imagination, the complex, the uncertain, into the way we make decisions today. So on the screen here is a framework called the Three Horizons Framework within the field of foresight by Bill Sharp. And what it says is essentially, you see the dark line, that's what you're doing today, that represents business as usual. And it's not going to last forever. You see, as time progresses, it actually loses fit for purpose. So as time progresses, everything loses fit for purpose. And we can see that here, right? That is where, within foresight, what you really want to do is challenge your assumptions around how things work, what you believe to be the right decision, right? Because eventually, what you're doing, or certain aspects of what you're doing, is going to lose fit for purpose. This dotted blue line, this represents the emerging future. And you can see the key difference is that it actually grows in fit for purpose over time. That, and you can see today, it's actually very low in fit for purpose. So you don't see it very often. It's not everywhere. It's hard to see the future. Right? They say the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. And so that's the second key aspect of foresight, is paying attention to what's happening around us, paying attention to the weak signals, the seeds of the future that allow us to see glimpses of, oh, what could it be like, right? And when you combine those two things together, deciding what's not fit for purpose, what is growing in fit for purpose, you hit the intersection. And that's where the agency hits, right? We have the agency to choose, once we're aware of what's no longer fit for purpose, once we're aware of what's growing in fit for purpose, to integrate into our communities. What should we amplify? What should we invest in? Where should we put our energy for change? I'll give you an example of what happens when we don't challenge our assumptions, change what we do, and we just keep doing the same thing. Right? Blockbuster, anyone familiar with Blockbuster? Apparently they have a tourist exhibit now, it's great. Yeah, they had a great operating model when they first came out. Right? VHS were expensive, so renting it made a ton of sense. Physical, in-person experiences were the move, right, to go to. And it was an experience. I loved it. I was like, wow, there's so many movies here. This is so cool. And over time, things changed, right? Companies got more efficient. Customer convenience became more of a priority. They had pay-per-view streamed directly to your homes, right? And Netflix, they saw the weak signals. They saw them. It was, they saw this 30-second trailer that took hours to load. Like, why is this a problem for us? Right? We sell movies. We rent movies. That takes so much time. There's no way the competition or this ever impacts us. So they kept doing what they're doing. Fast forward till today, now the only Blockbuster that exists is that tourist exhibit, right? They're bankrupt, and Netflix is worth billions. So this is an example of why we need to challenge our assumptions about the way we think the world works and what happens if we don't act. Right? We need to pay attention to what's happening around us, because what's happening around us shapes our environment. And our environment shapes the value of our services and the impact that we can have on our communities. So if there's misalignment there, then we are not fit for purpose anymore. So that's where foresight really comes in, right? It's challenging our assumptions about the world, finding the weak signals that you'll see today that apply to the workforce, and then imagining what would a world look like with these weak signals amplified. What happens if it were everywhere? How does that impact the decisions we make today? How does that change the way we see our situation? In order to do that, we need to change our relationship with uncertainty to embrace it. Right? It's where the world is in a state of disorder and flux. We can't just wait for that to change. It'll be too late by then. We need to act now. We need to lead with curiosity. So And, as my commitment to impact, here are 3 things to consider. Did this make a difference for you? Right? For any trend presentation, really, is do you see a change in any of these things? So when you think about the future of the workforce, how much change do you think is going to happen? Right? A lot of change, no change at all. When you think about the future of the workforce, what do you feel? Anxiety or excitement? When you think about the future of the workforce, how much control do you have over that? None or complete control? And the goal really isn't to land in any certain direction. It's just for change, right? Extremes on either end probably don't serve us, right? So this is the plan, future of the workforce. What I just shared earlier is really the context, right? The world of work is changing, which means the conditions for a thriving workforce are changing as well. So what I'm going to talk through are different trends, the weak signals within them, and how they're losing fit for purpose. Then we'll talk about how the evolution of work, going back to cycles, and how we might be able to shape the future ones. So trend number 1, workforce turmoil. Man, being in local government and interacting with the community is so worth it, but it can also be very challenging at times. Right? And we're seeing an increase in hostility from the community. There's multiple reasons. Polarization is one of them. In this study, they found that mayors from 2017 to 2021 experienced a 21% increase in psychological violence. And in local governments of populations 30,000 or more, over 90% experience psychological abuse. It's tough. These people are serving and they're just getting beat down for it. How are we supposed to maintain the energy for change? And citizens continue to expect higher service quality and delivery. And from the private sector, the expectations are growing and the needs are changing. So there's the interaction with the community, it's hurting. Citizens want more and the pressure is rising. Right? The resources that local governments have are also under constraint. Right? Infrastructure, the need to maintain that, preemption laws limiting tax growth. It's hard. You have more needs and fewer resources than ever, always needing to do more with less. And so what's starting to lose its, the value proposition that attract many, including me, to service is serving the public for the greater good. And it's harder than ever. It's still just as important. And I want to be clear that we want to carry that into the emerging future. In fact, that might be one of local government's biggest advantages. But when we're being treated in such a way, it's hard to maintain. And from a financial perspective, the competition for talent is much higher, right? If you have limited resources, but someone in marketing can just go to a private company and get paid 20, 50% more, what are you supposed to do? That's just attracting talent. How about maintaining it? And maintaining it is difficult too. You might have to cut them or hope you can maintain wages. So if you have limited resources, what are you supposed to do? That's what takes us to our next trend around wellness. So here's the current situation around what the workforce is experiencing. Right, 40% of the workforce experiences high levels of stress at work. 50% are experiencing burnout, and 75% are experiencing stress. Workplace stress is impacting their personal lives and relationships. It's tough. They're not having fun either. Workforce is not having a good time either. The World Health Organization came out with a study, 2016, that found that working 55 or more hours a week is actually killing people. 300,000 deaths attributed to from heart disease and another 300,000 from stroke. It's literally killing us to overwork. This image here, you see my friend Emma. She is an office worker of the future, and she's an artifact to basically show what happens if we don't change. You can see she's been at her desk for hours a day, so much so that it's shaped her posture. In other images, she has stress-induced eczema. She's not seen sunlight in a while. She's very pale. And the whole point of this is to really make the future feel real. Right? This is a very real possibility if we don't do anything. Other places, this is happening in other places in the world as well. Not only do we have quiet quitting and the Great Resignation here in China, we see how the workforce is handling hustle culture by lying flat. Right? So the lying flat movement is all about stopping this 996 work culture, right? 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week. It's unsustainable. All the workforce wants to do is lie flat. It's a toxic culture. And the community grew online, like 3,000 people, and then the government shut it down. Unfortunately, you can't shut down workforce needs, right? And all that really happened was that matured into the let it rot movement, where now the workforce has given up on achieving and contributing to organizations because they don't see it as possible. Might as well just live in existence where they can fend for themselves. And what we want to do is shape and prevent that from happening in our communities, right? We're starting to see weak signals, right? 45% of people think the American dream no longer holds true. This isn't from the Wall Street Journal in Chicago. 18% believe it never held true in the first place. See, influencers are saying the new American dream is to leave. They say, we are so incredibly blessed to be born in America that we can go anywhere in the country and get paid American salaries. That's what we're seeing, right? And this isn't everywhere, but now that we know this, we have the agency to shift the cultures that we have. How do we do that? Right? There's a great reprioritization happening with balance and wellness over work, right? So these assumptions that we have that work always comes first, flipping that on its head, at least challenging it to say, what if the workforce isn't always putting work first? Instead, it's putting wellness. How might we redesign the systems that we've had in place for years to align with that? And here's an expression of that, right? High stress jobs, it's tedious, some would say dangerous, low pay. Why would they stay? Why would they? So our next trend sounds dark, kind of is, end of abundance. So what does this mean? Right, starting off, US population growth is going down. Right? You need 2.1 births per woman to maintain a population. We're at 1.7. The growth rate for the United States for 4 years straight has been the lowest it's ever been at in the nation's history. On the other end of the spectrum, baby boomers are retiring, right? 10,000 per day on average. We call it the silver tsunami, right? Here's an example of why forecasting is different from foresight, right? If you forecast, you take historical data, project that into the future. If we trust the forecast, then we would not, we're at 49.6 million. But when disruption happens, when change happens to our forecasts, they're different, right? The forecasts are off. And so because of the pandemic, there's actually an extra 1.5 million extra retirees. with each decade, we see the labor growth decrease. All the way now to the point of 2020s, it's still the lowest it's ever been. Point is, I don't say this to scare you, it's just the places that we've gotten our labor from are going to shrink. They're going to shrink. We're going to need to find alternatives. And that starts with our hiring systems. Right? Our hiring systems were designed to filter out applicants, to find the best applicants who are at the top, and then hire those. That's not really fit for purpose when the number of applicants are only going to shrink. So what does it look like to redesign our hiring systems for scarcity? Part of it is looking at our reskilling, which is our next trend. So 50% of all employees will need reskilling by 2025. And people are experiencing skill gaps today, if not 5 years into the future. 2/3 of all occupations are going to be based on soft skills by 2040. Now, forecasts like these, futurists do not predict the future, but the value in predictions like these are that they shape behavior, right? People see this and they're like, oh, wow, maybe we should prioritize soft skills. And I'm willing to bet that that's actually growing and fit for purpose, right? Immersive and experiential learning changes the nature of reskilling. At the moment, most reskilling systems are all around information, technical knowledge, things you've memorized, right? But in this image here, we have learning that's based off of experience. So this is a simulation where you have to fire someone. That's something that's hard to get right on a test, right? You fire the person and they actually interact with you in different ways based off how you fire them. So you do it poorly, they start throwing stuff, breaking monitors, doing stuff, yeah, not good. Do it well, they write you a good review on Glassdoor. I'm like, hey, this is a good place. I'm a fan. Build a relationship with them. And that changes the fundamental dynamic of learning, right? Before things like conflict, leadership, those are things that you just need to experience it. You just need experience in order to get good at that. Still true, but now you can supplement it with simulations that adapt based off of your behavior. So focusing on soft skills, non-automatable skills will be the priority. And so the need isn't to hire experienced candidates. We need to see our situation differently. Yes, experienced candidates are only getting harder to find. But what if we focus, we design for the right potential to learn and reskill? How good are you at learning? How does that shape our situation? So that leads to our next trend around globalization. And yes, labor force in the US is shrinking. But that's not the case in other places of the world. Right? We see growth in populations in Africa and India. It's going to be the majority of the world by 2050. And yeah, white glove hiring services basically make it much easier to hire instantly. Right? And in this image, I had a startup called Remote, and they received billions of dollars in funding because they make that transition seamless. Here's an example. Right? There's a company called Freshies, fast food in Canada, and they hire workers from Nicaragua, pay them $3.75 an hour to run the cashier. And they've saved tons of money, right? These customers still get the interaction. I'm not advocating for this, right? Definitely use this information based off of your context, right? The main idea is to see that labor growth is going to be happening outside of the country, and global labor pools are only going to grow in fit for purpose. And so we need to challenge this assumption that staff need to reside within our communities. At least look at where can we start experimenting and seeing where does this assumption hold true. And that leads us to adaptability. So people are already trying and experimenting on this. Right? Most Fortune 500 companies are applying this technique of experimenting with their workforce. In this image here, we have Accenture, which is like a consulting firm based in technology. And this is their workforce plan. So 20% of their workforce is going to be role-based and integrated into the corporation. 20%. That's what the traditional job is, right? Full-time employment, they're integrated into the organization, they work in a department. The other middle 40%, that's flex talent. So now these are people who actually, more of their role is task-based, and they are still within the organization, but they move around departments. The last 40%, the external talent, they're completely task-based. They're not even really within the company, they're more on open talent marketplaces. And Accenture maintains this talent marketplace so that they can fulfill the capacity needs that they have, work on projects when they need them to. It's allowed them to be much more flexible without needing to pay for roles and having unnecessary redundancy. Other forms of adaptability are around remote work. And we did a survey from our members, and that at most, right, local government leaders anticipate 30% of jobs to be fully remote. More expect hybrid, right? You see a much higher expectation around hybrid. But this is where we're at currently in terms of our mental model, right? It's like, oh, there's no way. Most people will never be fully remote. By 2030, So how do we at least challenge that method of thinking? I'm not really advocating for one either way. It's just how do we challenge it? Unilever had a very useful approach to challenging that way of thinking through a program opt-in called UWork. Essentially, what they do, you opt into the program and you get a guaranteed portion of your salary along with benefits, and they change the nature of your job to complete large contracts. And so you can take on as many contracts as you want or as little as you want. So if you want to go to school or take care of your kids, you can just take one contract. If you want to work harder than you've ever worked before, take on 5. They piloted this in New Zealand and saw a lot of success. It's in several countries now. One last example of adaptability. So the largest 4-day workweek trial in the United States, Ireland, and Australia is a company that helps facilitate these experiments. They did a 4-day workweek trial for 6 months with no reduced pay. And besides, increased revenue, increased productivity, higher degree of wellness, employee happiness, what I wanted to point out is this question from this survey. If you were offered a 5-day week job, how much of a salary increase would it take for you to accept? Right? I think it's like 13% said they would never. Another 13% said 50% or more. 40% said 25 to 50, 26 to 50. Think about the value of retention, right? And how much employees value wellness and that flexibility and adaptability. These are people who completed the 6-month trial. Of the 33 companies that went through it, none said that they would be ending it. So a balance of flexibility and security are growing in fit for purpose. What else is growing in fit for purpose, right? Work being location and time independent. That's just a different type of workforce. So how is work evolving, right? We see this traditional way of working and the new ways of working. What are the new ways of working, right? What's declining in fit is going to the office on a set schedule. What's growing in fit, working from anywhere at any time. What's declining in fit, work comes first. What's growing in fit, wellness comes first. What's declining in fit, work is about knowledge. It's about who knows the most, who can offer the most. What's changing now is work is about who can learn the best, who can learn quickly, who can learn different things, who can unlearn things. What's declining in fit is how much an individual contributes. This is where we get silos. What's growing in fit is how well can you collaborate. And finally, right, what's declining in fit is permanent full-time staff. What's growing in fit is flexible on-demand staff. So we see these ages, right, of work. At the agriculture age, from farms, industrial age to factories, information age to offices. That's where we're at right now. What's the next age? Right, what do we want that to be? The future doesn't exist. We have the agency to shape it. Right? What do we want to do with that? What kind of work do we want to do in the future? That's my question to you, right? There are multiple futures that are possible. If we only think from the past, then there's no hope. But if we can incorporate the future, uncertainty, possibility, open our eyes to what's possible, there's hope. Right? I'll leave you with this. Not changing only sets you further behind. Embrace uncertainty and be proactive. Thank you. Take a question or two. I think we have time for one or two. If you have one, just raise your hand and we'll get a mic runner for you. I also can't see very well, so being vocal would be great. Doug's gotcha. Doug's gotcha.
Real quick question. That 4-day trial, was that 10 hours a day?
32-hour weeks.
32-hour weeks.
32-hour weeks, yeah. 10% of them, halfway through the program, they decided to do like 35-hour or something like that. But the requirement to participate in the trial was 32 with a meaningful reduction in work and full pay. Anything else? Should be good, if not. All righty. Thank you very much.